I finally completed Spider-Man PS4. I did everything that there is to do in the game, not just with the base game itself, but I did get the DLC and I completed all of the DLC on top of that. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to give my final thoughts on it. You guys know that I made a video, I think a couple weeks ago at this point, maybe like 2 weeks ago, where I talked about playing this game and just giving my first thoughts on it, and I really, really liked what I played of it. And now that I've done pretty much everything, I want to go over some of the story beats that I thought were very good, whether the game continued to live up to my expectation as I went further on and as I completed it, and then also just talk about what I thought about the DLC as well. So starting with the story of the game, the main campaign. Obviously, for anybody who maybe hasn't completed this yet, spoiler warning. I will be spoiling things in this. When we see what happens with Octavius and how he turns, I think that was kind of obvious. But to me, what was very interesting was not even Miles Morales, right? Because we kind of know what's going to go on with him, how he gets bit by the spider, and he's going to become the next Spider-Man eventually, and Peter's going to train him and all that. That's very awesome. I really thought that was cool that they injected that into this story. A couple things I found surprising story-wise was the impact of the ending, not just with Octavius and the final battle and how intense it was between him and Peter. I thought that was very cool, how emotional that got. But then also Aunt May dying really surprised me. I was not expecting that, and it really, I think, it definitely hit an emotional point, or I'd say that was the emotional peak of the story, and it was really, really well done, man. And again, it was kind of unexpected. I don't want to say it was a twist or anything, because it wasn't that extreme, but it was very much like, wow, now I'm seeing a Peter Parker where, Uncle Ben's gone, obviously, but now Aunt May is gone as well. So very interesting there. And then the other thing that really surprised me was when we found out about Harry and how he is locked up in that tank. How Osborn has him, or Norman has him locked up in that tank, and they're alluding to the idea that in the sequel, which there's clearly going to be a sequel, everything's here for it, that he's going to become Venom, and that the symbiote, or whatever it is, that makes up Venom is actually going to basically be created by Norman Osborn, and Harry, his son, who's very sick, is going to be the one that becomes Venom. And that, to me, is extremely interesting, and that will be really cool to see how they flesh this out going forward with Spider-Man 2, and I'm sure they're going to want to keep making these games as long as people love them, because they're done really well. And so the main story was very, very good, man. This was one of those times where I found myself very, very intrigued by what's going to happen next, wanting to continue the story beats and just get to the end pretty much to see, how is this going to wrap up, man? And I love how it did the thing where it did a great job of wrapping up the events that unfolded for this story. Obviously, it's self-contained, but also leaving a lot of threads open for a future story to be told. So that's very, very awesome. When it comes to the actual gameplay segments, like the boss fights and stuff, I think the boss fights were actually done really well. I think the high point for me was when you were fighting, who was it, Shocker and Vulture at the same time, where you have to kind of stay in the air, and it's like a double team battle. I just thought that was so well done. There was no point in the game where I got insanely frustrated, and I was playing it on the hardest difficulty at the time, and it felt fair. But it was well done. It was well balanced. It didn't feel like anything was too difficult or too unfair. Anytime I messed up, it felt like it was my fault. And I just like the amount of options you have at your disposal when it comes to combat. Some people were saying the combat gets a little bit repetitive, and at first, when I was first playing the game, I thought the same thing until I realized like there's a lot of different gadgets here. There's a lot of different environment interactions you can have, and yeah, when it comes to the gameplay experience, I think that Insomniac did a very good job with the pacing of the boss fights in particular. Even though the boss fights were pretty simple, I kind of appreciated that because I feel like I'm playing a superhero game here. This shouldn't have to be something too insanely difficult. Like the final battle with Octavius was pretty satisfying, I'd say. It felt appropriate. And then the final scene when you're like kind of on the side of the building, pretty cinematic, pretty simple, but it gets the point across that like this is an intense battle. You're on the side of a building, and I don't know. I really enjoyed it. There wasn't anything with the main story and the main beats of the game that bothered me. Now, the only thing for me that got a little bit tedious, but I need to emphasize here that the reason why this criticism is here is because it's by my own choice. You do not have to 100% complete the game. They don't really even encourage you to do so unless you're just a trophy hunter, which I will say this is the first platinum I earned, and it felt really good, and I may want to continue to hunt for more platinums because it actually felt really good to get that final platinum trophy. And, people don't have to do that. Most people just play the game and they play the main story, but they did kind of set it up pretty easily for me to want to 100% complete this game. So I did decide to do that, and I will admit the one thing, like out of all the side activities that got really redundant, and I hope they find a better way to implement it in the sequel, was with the random crimes. Like when I did all the other side activities and I realized, wait, how am I still not 100% complete? It's because I realized that you have to go through each section of the open world map and you have to complete a certain amount of random crimes in each section, and they add up to like 30 or 40 crimes or something like that. It's like this ridiculously high number, and a lot of them are very repetitive, and it like at that moment that's when it got pretty tedious, where I was like, okay, this is going to be a bit of a grind. And I'm not going to lie, to 100% complete this game, it is a little bit of a grind. But here's the thing, I don't really mind the grind. I like the grinding games if it's done well. Again, the only low point was those random crimes, but every other challenge I thought was cool. Most of them, they were pretty interesting and they were pretty varied. So overall, I think they did a pretty good job. I just think in the next game, they really have to figure out what to do with those random crime system and how to make that not as repetitive. I think honestly the simplest solution would have been to just not have as many required in order to 100% complete the game. What was even more annoying was that in the DLC, which the DLC was awesome by the way, but if you want 100% each DLC, you have to do the same thing. You have to do these random crimes, and like as you can tell, that was really my biggest gripe with this game is those random crimes. They were cool at first, but if you want to actually try to unlock everything and fully complete the game, man, they can get very tedious. But moving on to the DLC, I thought the DLC was actually really, really awesome. It was certainly worth the money, and it did add, in my opinion, to the story, or at least Peter Parker's, Spider-Man's story, in a meaningful way, because the characters and the interactions you have, and when you complete all the DLC, you realize that they're still continuing to set stuff up for the sequel. So you have this idea that in Spider-Man 2, it's pretty clear that Peter is going to be training Miles a lot, or at that point he would have had a significant amount of training, because in the DLC you keep getting calls from Miles and he keeps saying, hey Peter, when are we going to train? When are we going to train? And he's very eager, And then on top of that, you see what happens with Yuri, which is like you're kind of like your cop partner who helps you out in the game, and how they're setting up for her to become a type of vigilante. I don't know the name of the character she's supposed to play. Is it Wraith, I think, or something? I remember looking into it because I thought it was very interesting at the end of the final DLC, I believe, and seeing the interactions with Black Cat. It's very well done, honestly, and it really added, at least story-wise, some significant stuff to the game, where some of the stuff, again, did get a little bit repetitive, but I did find myself wanting to continue to see what happens, and when it comes to DLC, I think it was done very well. Like, it's nice to actually see, standalone DLC you can buy that actually adds content to the base game. At least for me, that was pretty meaningful. It wasn't the best, most mind-blowing thing in the world, but for the price I paid for it, it felt like it really added to the experience. And when it comes to the base game itself, I will say totally worth a $60 price tag. Now, I paid like 40 or 30 bucks for this game because it was on sale, but certainly worth the money. I got it for a deal, in my opinion, but for the amount of time and content and the story I got out of this single player experience, well worth the money. So overall, as you can tell, my experience with Spider-Man for PS4 has been overall a very good one. I don't have really many complaints. The only complaint, once again, just to reiterate here and close out, was just with how repetitive the random crimes could become. But I appreciated all of the unlocks, all of the different suits you could unlock, the variety in enemies and how there's different enemy types. For me, it just never really felt like it got to a point where I was bored with the game, to the point where like I didn't want to play it anymore, at least going through the main game and the story. And it was just a very good experience, and it's another single player narrative driven experience with amazing gameplay and amazing open world. Everything was just so well done, and it's another game that I can't wait for the sequel now, and if there's a sequel, I'm going to want to get the PlayStation 5 simply to play this Spider-Man sequel and see how the story continues, how it progresses. And yeah, the final thing I want to say here is that out of everything with this game that has impressed me most when it comes to Insomniac, the gameplay was good, obviously. It was very enjoyable, but I had to say, I think they did an incredible job with the story. Now, I'm not saying the story or the narrative is on the same level as, say, something like God of War, The Last of Us, but maybe in some areas it is. But I will say, for a superhero game, especially an established superhero, a very popular one, one where they could have taken the easy route and just, went through the same beats that we always see and always go through. They didn't do that, and they did kind of their own thing, and I had to say, I'm just very impressed with how good of a job Insomniac did, kind of putting their own spin on Spider-Man's universe here and the story and the characters within it, and establishing it as its own thing, because this is, there's a lot of different Spider-Man universes, there's a lot of different Spider-Man stories that have been told, but so far this has to be one of my favorite. And again, the emotional peak at the end there, very good job, very good voice acting, very good writing, very good pacing as well, and it's just overall very impressive. I just didn't expect that from Insomniac, and especially with a Spider-Man game, but man, they really nailed it, and I now know why this game was nominated for Game of the Year. It's very deserving of that nomination. So yeah, that's going to do it for the video, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. I know I enjoyed every minute of playing this game, and we're coming right up on Days Gone, so that's what I'm going to play next. And then after that, hopefully I can look forward to playing Horizon Zero Dawn, and then hopefully you guys can look forward to those videos in the future as well. So be sure to leave this video a like if you did enjoy it, or if you agree with it, if you enjoyed Spider-Man. I will be also interested to see what you guys have to say about your own experience with the game, and what negatives did you have, what positives did you have. Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the bell notification icon. You can be notified anytime I upload a new video, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that, because it helps tremendously. But until next time, guys, take care.